Okay, hello. My name is Matt Wormington, and I am a member of the Dole Institute's Student Advisory Board, the official student group of the Institute. The Student Advisory Board is a bipartisan group whose members have access to exciting opportunities through their involvement with the Institute. This includes volunteering for evening programs and networking with our special guests. If you are a student and you are interested in the student group, please contact us by emailing dolesab@ku.edu. Welcome to the Dole Institute of Politics, and thank you for attending today's program, presented by the Department of Military History at the Command and General Staff College at Fort Leavenworth. After the program, we will have some time for the audience to ask questions. If you have a question, please raise your hand, and a student worker with a microphone will come to you. Please stand if you're able and ask just one brief question. The Dole Institute's mission is to foster civil and respectful discussion around important and often difficult topics. Please phrase your questions with this in mind. Before we begin, I would like to remind you all to please turn off your cell phones. And now, please join me in welcoming Dr. Sean Kalick, Director of the Department of Military History at CGSU.
Thank you, and welcome to this afternoon's presentation, which I have the awesome honor to introduce a national institution, Dr. Babb. Dr. Babb got his BA in Bowdoin College, which is in Maine, and he's a proud Mainer, and he will tell you at every opportunity, which is fantastic. He has an MPA from Clark University, an MA in East Asian Language and Culture from the University of Kansas, and also a PhD from the University of Kansas. Geoff is truly, I would argue, a national asset, that his understanding of China, first as an intel officer in the Army for the better part of 20-some years, and then serving on the CGSC staff for another long period of time. He is the go-to guy at CGSC and Leavenworth, and sometimes within the Army writ large, to talk about China, both in a historical context and in a contemporary context. So I think you're in for a fantastic afternoon with Geoff's intimate knowledge of present-day China and also the historical context of China. So without further ado, Dr. Babb in Lend-Lease in the American military mission to China.
Thank you. Now I got to try to live up to that. Yeah, I am from Maine, and that means I talk fast, and I was in the Army, so I don't hear good, so I talk loud. I've got a lot of slides, and I'm going to run through them really quick because I'm looking forward to the question and answer part at the end. There are several people in this room that I will likely call on to give me a little help on some of the past of this China. I want to state right up front, because questions at the end may have to do with current China. I'm only representing myself. I don't represent the U.S. government, the U.S. Army, or the Command and General Staff College. Just Geoff Babb, a continuing student of China. So I want to talk about beyond Lend-Lease, which means who did it and how we got to it. And I will basically end as it ends in 1945. So my agenda, do some background on how Western, especially Western, but also some Japanese equipment came to China. So our forebears, we did not inherit tabula rasa. We inherited a China that had bought and both training and equipment from a lot of other nations over historical time. Then we'll look specifically at the period 28 to 41 for just a moment, that modern backup of modern equipment at the time. And then most of the presentation will be during American support with the war in Japan. So I wanted to give you a historical backdrop to this, because we didn't just drop in 1941 and start from scratch. Why did China not do as well with its military equipment as Japan did? Not this brief. Okay? The Meiji Restoration and what Japan did to become the power in Asia is a very different model and a very different culture with a very different set of circumstances than China. What I'm going to try to do is specifically look at China where Japan, for all intents and purposes, is the enemy. From 1894 on, there's no doubt who China's major enemy is. Okay, so I'll start with what is normally a little-known fact. The United States Navy plied the waters of the Yangtze and its tributaries starting in 1854. There were Navy and Marine personnel that had actually gone ashore and shot at some Chinese as early as 1841 during what was the British First Opium War. So we go a long ways back with China. So when they do have their self-strengthening movement, we are there. We are selling them weapons along with the other European powers. They are so fractured, however, that they tend not to decide on, we're going to buy this with this caliber of this type. They just buy stuff. And it's everywhere. And as we go through this, you'll see and you'll go, how can this be? If you get a chance to go to Beijing and go to their National Military Museum, on the back side of it, there was a park of many of these different vehicles around the world, and just knowing what they are and where they're from, when you look at them, it's hard to imagine. And you'll see that as we go through here. There's an interesting book on importing European armies that talks to how the European armies came to Asia. And I put a picture of the Empress Dowager Cixi in there. She gets a very bad rap, especially from the movie 55 Days at Peking when she slinks out of town afterwards. But she may very well have been the biggest problem with China doing all it needed to do to incorporate the different military equipment sets, because she carried on the Chinese tradition of, I want your equipment, I don't want your culture. And that will carry through as well as a theme. The first two that you can argue started training Chinese and fighting on Chinese soil are these two gentlemen. Frederick Townsend Ward, he's a mercenary from Massachusetts. He will build the ever-victorious army. He will take it to war. He will get himself mortally wounded. And he will be replaced by the British engineer captain, Charles Gordon, who's also known as Chinese Gordon, but also Gordon of Khartoum. He made it out of China, but he didn't make it out of the Sudan. The seminal event in some ways of the end of dynastic rule in China is the Eight-Nation Invasion, better known by us as the Boxer Rebellion. With the Boxer Rebellion, they're paying an indemnity to us. But the real payment is we're going to have U.S. military personnel on the ground from 1900 until 1941. And most of the rest of these nations will also have their forces in and around China. The last time I was in Chongqing in 2011, there's a French base still on the river where the French Marines, but the Brits, the Americans, and the French guarded the river for the missionaries and the merchants. The Chinese Navy today is a whole different story we might get into later. But the Boxer Rebellion itself was after the Sino-Japanese War, 1894-95, which was a real humiliation against just the Japanese. This is, they're humiliated in front of the whole rest of the world. And the Empress Dowager made a big mistake. She thought the Boxers was going to win, and she ordered the Imperial Chinese army to join in, and 26,000 foreigners basically whipped up on 300,000 Chinese of various varieties. So it doesn't get much more humiliating than that unless you actually look at the statistics for the 1894-1895 Sino-Japanese War, which was a complete rout of the Chinese. We'll start to get the Americans in. General Stilwell and General Marshall are shown here sitting together in a photograph of the faculty at the infantry school at what was then Fort Benning, Georgia, and I guess it's Fort Benning again. We had this regiment, the 15th, in there from 1912 till 1938. They were together in Tianjin in the regiment in the 20s. And the other book is about the 4 different regiments starting in 1900 through 1941 that served there at various times. And they're quite famous. 3 of those crests have dragons in them. Those units are still in the United States Army today. Those regiments are still in the Army. Those crests you'll still see soldiers wear. But we weren't their first choice. When Sun Yat-sen finally came to power again, he first came to power 1911, 1912, and he was pushed aside. When he came back into power, he knew he needed military help. He will send Chiang Kai-shek to Russia. And Russia is the Soviet Union, is the primary ally of Sun Yat-sen and the Chinese through the 20s. So if you watch the movie The Sand Pebbles, and you see the American forces having problems against both nationalists and others, we weren't the favorite. We were not the favorite. Warlords independently sought the foreign military equipment. And I'm going to show you a map in a minute of just some of the warlords. Mixed imports and homemade, also Japanese. And so they had their own arsenals, but they bought a lot. This is a map that depicts the warlords. So Chiang Kai-shek is basically the senior military officer for Sun Yat-sen, and they're down south in this area, okay? So this is the Kuomintang's home territory, right here. 1927, Chiang Kai-shek will move north. He will be either militarily defeating, buying off, cajoling, or just asking if they would join so we can reunite the country. He does quite well and will reform a national headquarters, a capital at Nanjing here. Up here is Manchuria. It's where the Japanese and the Russians have been at each other and at each other's throat since the First World War and before. The Russians will slowly move across China. There's 2 big treaties in the 1860s that will give them this piece of territory. This is China until 1860. So Vladivostok is there. So Manchuria has its own warlord. It's this guy's father. This is Zhang Suiliang. His father, Zhang Zuolin, is the big, important, powerful warlord up here. So every place that you see the one, that was his. And so that will come into play a bit later. But what you see here is Chiang Kai-shek and Zhang Suiliang, because Zhang Suiliang's father was assassinated by the Japanese. And he gained a hatred of the Japanese, and he will hook up with Chiang Kai-shek that will really be a key piece to the reunification of Japan to fight, reunification of China to fight the Japanese. Just to give you an idea of everybody rolling their own, these different warlords just went out and bought their own planes, which means they also had to buy their own, they had to train their own pilots and mechanics, and they had to get all the other stuff that we associated with running an Air Force. All this then will have to come together 36 and 37. Now, they don't know it at the time because when the Second World War starts in Asia is 1937. They don't quite know it's coming because the Japanese have been occupying key sectors of Manchuria and then northeast China all the way down to Beijing since 1900. So at the end of the day, just find a mechanic that can make it fly. The Americans will start. So Colonel Jewett here will take a delegation over and we will sell them American planes. Chiang Kai-shek will use those planes against one of the warlord armies, and the United States, which you guys know it never does, we try to lecture Chiang Kai-shek on how he can use our equipment. And he tells this band to pack sand and go home. We will be replaced by the Italians. And Jewett will not be replaced until the Flying Tigers show up. This is the Central Aircraft Machine Manufacturing Company, and you can see the dates on there. This is when the Chinese are buying mostly American equipment, commercial sales. Okay? And William D. Pauley, the ambassador and businessman, is part of this. But you could see this lineup of Chinese and American executives that are putting together the buys of aircraft for the Chinese. And the P-40s and the C-46s and 47s that will be bought start before Lend-Lease. The Russians will be kicked out by Chiang Kai-shek and by Mao. The Russians will be kicked out in 27 when he goes on the Northern Expedition. And Mao will tell his Russian advisors, Soviet advisors, to go home on the Long March. So you can argue that Zhou Enlai was really still in charge and Mao is the two. You'll see Zhou Enlai and Mao together all the way through 1976. But they're the two leading people to study when you're looking at the Long March, the 5 extermination campaigns that Chiang Kai-shek did against the communists. But it really all starts in 1927 with sometime what's called the Shanghai Massacre. The Russians said, get along with the communists. And Chiang Kai-shek said, I'm tired of getting along with the communists. And he does away with the left wing of the Kuomintang Party. And of the 60 divisions over 10 years was the promise. That's going to come in. We're going to promise 90 and get 37 done. The Germans promised 60 and got 8 done. The 8 best divisions in Chiang Kai-shek's army in 1937, when they began the war with Japan, will be German trained and equipped. Von Seeckt is famous for us. After World War I, von Seeckt put together the after-action review for the German army in World War I. And the thought pieces for doctrine and how to fight in the future were coming out of that after-action review that was run by von Seeckt. As I understand it, and there's at least one guy in the audience that could help this, von Seeckt did not seem to like Hitler very much, wasn't very much enamored with going back to Germany, but in the end, he's a pretty old general and he kind of does what he wants. But I believe he does go back to Germany from China. So that's why you see the 1935, and then Falkenhayn, he stays there till 37. When essentially the Germans tell the Japanese, it would be better if you'd stop training the Chinese to beat us. So this map then shows when the war begins. On the 7th of July, 1937, near Beijing, where the green arrow is, we will see the Japanese begin to move south from Manchuria and west and south from Beijing, where they had forces established. What's in pink there is what they will achieve by 1940. And I put that map up there on purpose. This is where Japan is in 40. So in December of 41, when we get there, this is essentially stalemated. Now, there's a lot of current scholarship that's coming out that's relooking the battles that the nationalists fought between 1937 and 1941 that cast a lot of doubt on what the Americans under Stilwell and others were sending back to Washington about the effect that the Nationalist Army was actually having on the Japanese Army. They actually fought much better and caused a great deal more damage to the Japanese than we normally like to talk about. Soviet assistance to the nationalists. The Russians are gone, the Japanese are gone, we're not there yet. Who's going to step in? The Russians are going to step in. The Soviets are going to step in. And it's going to be tanks, equipment, planes. Pilots will fly with the Chinese, for the Chinese. But then there's a problem, because in April of 41, Stalin and Hitler will sign a pact, like Mao and Nixon will sign a pact. So I got the wrong pact at the wrong time. This pact then takes the Russians out of the war until 8 August 1945. Therefore, they have to stop supplying the Chinese. And now the Chinese are a real trick. There's nobody that they can get supplies from. The Brits have got Hong Kong. They don't really want to mess with the Japanese. And the French are in Indochina. They don't really want to mess with the Japanese and make them mad. So China is really in a very tough spot in terms of getting military equipment. Small arms that they can make themselves, ammunition they can make themselves, but anything like useful artillery. In the First World War, the killer on the battlefield is artillery. You can't have a modern army without artillery. Today it looks like you can't have a modern army without drones, but back then it was artillery. Why does Stilwell have such a, I'll just use the word, warped view of China? He'd been there since 1912. He was an attaché, and this is the group of attachés that are there. And you're going to see several of these guys pop up again. They are watching the Japanese move from Beijing down the rail line to pincer out of Shanghai and Hangzhou, and then move up the Yangtze River, the Nanjing Massacre, then Wuhan, and then a little bit further. Then they are at the end of their operational reach with ground forces. They will begin to bomb Chongqing nearly continuously for the next 3 years. But they can't get ground forces up the river because of their operational reach. They will try a big offensive in 41, and I'll talk about that later. So these are the guys that are writing back to the United States and telling everybody that wants to listen to the United States how badly the nationalists are doing against the Japanese. But we're looking at fighting like one-on-one. The Chinese armies were losing as much as, it took 5 Chinese divisions to defeat 1 Japanese division. In some places, 10 Chinese divisions to fight 1 Japanese division. The problem was they were actually doing it, and they were actually causing great damage. But these guys are the guys that are charged with reporting back what the Nationalist Army looks like and how it fights. And they saw it fight. One of them is a guy named Frank Roberts, who's the uncle of Senator Roberts. He was on the Panay, sailing upriver, when it was attacked by the Japanese. The naval personnel that controlled the boat, the gunboat, were injured, and he basically took over And for that, he received a Distinguished Service Cross for that before the war. Because we're not in the war yet. Japanese apologized profusely for this mistake that was no mistake. And it'll be a while before we finally get our own air attack on ships. But Claire Chennault, Captain, United States Army Air Corps, retired, gets a chance to go over to China and build the Chinese Air Force. And he and Madam Chiang and Chiang Kai-shek will become quite close friends. And that will also be a constant gnaw at Stilwell, because they have very different ways of fighting the war. Chennault says we can beat the Japanese with air alone. And Stilwell says, no way, that's possible. But Chiang liked that one better. And so, big friendly smiles. If you could see the close picture, he's not wearing anything American. He's wearing Chinese jump wings and Chinese accoutrements. He will not come back into the United States Air Force and be promoted to Major General until 1942, once the war begins. He's a contractor, and we have funny names for them. So, we're now ready to start the Lend-Lease problem. Roosevelt is now decided, even though we're not at war in Europe or in Asia, that it's time to help our allies with equipment. Therefore, Lend-Lease is born. This gentleman, John L. Magruder, who had been an attaché in China and spoke Chinese, he was picked to head that mission. And as you can see on here, he went to China. There's a team in Washington that's helping to push stuff forward. The only place it can go through is Burma. So they've only got one lock, land line of communication. And so into Rangoon, into Chongqing, and in Washington, you have these Americans whose job it is to push this equipment into China, which China is paying for, some with loans from us, but it's not a giveaway program. So he, on December 7th, will move from being basically the director of Lend-Lease in China to the liaison officer to Chiang Kai-shek. And guess who's going to pick up control of Lend-Lease? It will be Stilwell. The initial look, and this feeds into the Stilwell narrative of Chiang Kai-shek's army isn't any good. It's a political army, doesn't know how to fight, it's not equipped to fight, needs massive help. Okay? Poor training. And again, back to artillery. If you don't have artillery, you don't have an army. You can ask Tom Dazé about that. He'll lie to you, but it's true. Little activity on the front. It's literally a stalemate by now. No interest of being aggressive. The American way of war is offensive. I argue what Sun Tzu says is more applicable. Invincibility lies in the defense, the possibility of victory in the offense. There's no possibility of victory against the Japanese, therefore you go on the defensive. You stay on the defensive until the tide turns, for whatever reason it can turn. Okay? At the end of the day, maintenance faulty. Use of mechanized units doubtful. No tanks. Maybe not even trucks. You got to teach them from the ground up, the maintenance piece. Most of the part of China that had the factories and those people that could build stuff, Japanese had already taken over. A bunch of them had moved to inland. There was a huge move inland to the Chongqing area, but they just don't have what it needs. Again, the American kid going to war has been driving tractors out here in the fields of Kansas. They either behind a horse or a water buffalo. They don't have that depth of people that are trained to do this. I'm sorry, I went the wrong way. If you get further interested in the piece that I'm giving to you right now, this is a great book on it. And I just want you to read the underline. This isn't about leading, commanding. This is about advising and assisting. Okay? This is going to be the biggest fight between General Stilwell and Chiang Kai-shek. He's very much a very typical American. Either lead, follow, or get out of the way. But we're going after the Japanese. And that does not go well with Chiang. This is the big Lend-Lease slide. So if you came here only for Lend-Lease, this is your only slide. Okay? Who does it go to? India and China, 1,400,000,000. If you subtracted how much the British stole, starting off the docks in Rangoon through the war, you could also see why Chiang Kai-shek was pretty mad. And look where it's all going. 27% is going to the Soviets. 43% is going to the Brits. Yes, Asia's chopped liver. And he's the end piece. What are we sending? Munitions, services, industrial materials, and then 12% agricultural products. We're feeding Britain, we're feeding Russia, and we have a little bit going into China. So you can see what was sent, and you can see the percentages of who it was sent to. How does it get there? That is a Jeep torn apart being walked up the road, okay? In the end, so that's the way it begins. In the end, they're going to get our M4 tanks. We are going to have combined U.S. Army, Chinese Nationalist Army tank units. And so I argue, when it's all said and done, during the Second World War, the effort that the United States made to assist, arm, train, equip, and later advise in combat was a success. Okay? It's hard to say that because nobody thought the war was going to be over until like 49, and then along comes Oppenheimer, right? 45 is a surprise. If you look at this effort as an 8-year effort by the United States Army, 41 to 49, to build 90 Chinese divisions capable of not only knocking the Japanese off, but even probably helping us in the war on the Japanese home islands. Would Chiang Kai-shek have attacked the home islands? Well, he offered 10 divisions to help us in Korea in 1950. Might have. So at the end of the day, we are not arming, training, and equipping and advising the Japanese for nothing. We are looking forward at where this might have to go as this war continued in Asia. Who are the guys that are really helping? I've picked these 5. I mean, there are hundreds of thousands of U.S. military personnel in the China-Burma-India theater. The vast majority of them are air and air-related. But there are significant numbers of ground forces in something called the Service of Supply. So, I'm going to talk about Stilwell here with Chiang. I'm going to talk about Boatner and Stilwell. Frank Dorn is a very important figure. I want to talk about Chiang and Wedemeyer. Wedemeyer will replace Stilwell in October of 1944. And then the picture up here of an American Army colonel with Mao. We, in August of 1944, began to work directly with the communists up in Yan'an in north-central China. And we will continue to do that until March of 1947. Yeah, we are with Mao until 1947. Little geography. When a U.S. Army trainer left Fort Benning, Georgia, went down to Savannah to get on a boat, 65 days later, he got to India. Planning figures. In 65 hours, we can move a division to Korea. we couldn't get 120 guys to India in less than that time. Now, the general officers were flying, but the troops that are going to do the work, they're going to a place called Ramgarh. Ramgarh is an old British base that had become a POW camp that they gave us. And the Brits have supplies on the ground in India that we will begin to use early on. So when you see early, you're going to see Americans training Chinese in British kit. And that will be the Chinese Army in India. Where are they going to go? They're going to build a road to Ledo. They're going to take the airfield at Myitkyina, which will drive the Japanese south, because the hump doesn't go north and south. It goes west to east. You go from Ledo over the hump to Kunming. Those are some pretty high mountains up there in the hump. But the further you can come south in Burma, the easier the flights are. So we're going to be increasing the flow of equipment into China as we take northern Burma back, while the Brits are taking eastern Burma back. But that pink hash mark is where the Japanese occupy. So that's your geography lesson. This is a great little, soldiers do yearbooks, they do unit books. This is the one for the guys at Ramgarh. I found it online about 20 years ago and couldn't believe I'd heard about it, but I found it and I bought a copy. So I actually have a copy of it. Notice here, Chief of Staff, Chinese Army in India, Hayden Boatner. So Boatner there, he is one of the key figures at Ramgarh training the Chinese, to include their generals. And one of their generals, Sun Li Ren, is a graduate of Purdue VMI, and he speaks better English than I do. So this is Boatner. This is his background. Lot of time in China. A lot of time in China. This is Dorn. The Army University Press put out a nice book. The two books that I showed you about the regiments in China, the same guy wrote this book. I got to be one of the readers of it and suggest. He had a lot of personal stuff in there. I said, just cut it down to the military stuff, make it readable for the military guys. But Dorn is Stilwell's right-hand man, and he is the trainer. And he has been in China a long time doing a lot of things, to include the 15th Infantry Regiment. The 15th Infantry Regiment basically brings up the American Army in China. I talked about it's not all just we train them, we advise them. These two formations are us and them working side by side. So over here you have the Chinese-American Composite Wing, and over here you have the 1st Provisional Tank Group, of which I believe there's 2 regiments. Okay? And you can see this is the commander of this talking to Stilwell with a Chinese guy looking over their shoulder. And of course, the composite wing is here. The Chinese are flying the Flying Tigers. This is the guy that goes up and works with Mao. You can see his resume of working in China. He is not going to do well after the war because of the Who Lost China problem. Because, again, what American Army colonel wouldn't want his Legion of Merit pinned on him by Mao Zedong? This doesn't look good in the far-right newspapers of America, okay? So he's one of the guys that gets painted with, you love the communists and Mao. And you can see the dates on there. His personal memoir was this book. There's 2 good books out there that have been done, one very recently, on this mission. Gary Borges in the back, he wrote a wonderful monograph on Merrill's Marauders in northern Burma. And what Gary is able to say is how Stilwell will drive this U.S. unit from 3,000 effectives to 300 effectives. Okay? They should have been pulled out of this fight far earlier than they were. They were the only U.S. Army ground combat forces in the theater. They were the only Americans. So the only excuse you can make for Stilwell is he had to show that the Americans had the same level of sacrifice as the Brits, the Indians, and the British Indian Army and the Chinese. This is their, unit does great stuff. You give them a presidential unit citation, which is the highest unit citation that can be given. And I'll just let you read this citation. This is how to write up a disaster. They were on the outskirts of the city, took the city in May. They didn't get consolidated and take the airfield until August. And they got chewed up by the Japanese that were there. And Stilwell was pumping in anybody that he could find in the theater. And he was changing commanders because Merrill's Marauders, that Merrill had several heart attacks. It should not be known as Merrill's Marauders. It should be known as Hunter's Marauders. Because Hunter was the guy that formed them, did the majority of the training. Another one of the Stilwell issues, he was very much a guy that liked his own picked people. And so he had kind of this trusted group around him. And it was hard to break into that if you hadn't served with him for a long time. This is Sun Li Ren, the commander of the 38th Division. After Merrill's Marauders take Myitkyina, we will then be able to work much harder in northern Burma, and we will begin to move south. And we'll move south. Merrill's Marauders will be taken over by the Mars Task Force. That task force, 124th Cavalry Regiment, Texas National Guard, and the guys from Merrill's Marauders that they could bring back after they got kind of rejuvenated for a while in India. But the force that's really doing the fight is the two Chinese divisions that we trained at Ramgarh, and then you can see coming down from the north is Y Force. Well, Y Force is the guys that were trained and equipped up in China. So, these two quotes are it. All you need to know. You don't need to read Tuckman's book. You don't need to read any others. This is the answer. Stilwell believed Chiang Kai-shek wasn't doing his job and told him so about every other day that he could. And what Chiang said to the newly arrived Ambassador Hurley was, you got to get rid of this guy. And Hurley, a personal friend of Roosevelt's, went back, there's no way this connection between Stilwell and Chiang can survive. I don't know how it's lasted this long. And Roosevelt will relieve Stilwell and replace him with a guy named Wedemeyer. Another knock on Stilwell. This is the war Stilwell wants to be in. Out in the field, weapon slung over his shoulder, talking to the field commanders, circulating among the troops. This is Hurley, who will become the ambassador. This is Wedemeyer with Chiang. Wedemeyer would be known today as the Pentagon's perfumed prince. Didn't like the field, never went to the field, may never have owned any field gear. Brilliant strategist, well thought of in Washington. He will be the guy that helps Marshall build what will become the 90 division gamble. How many divisions does the United States need to build to fight World War II? The beginning answer was about 250. What we're going to settle for in the end, for a variety of reasons I'm not going to go into here, is 90. It's actually 89, but we'll get there. Oh, sorry. This is the 1944 laydown. So while he's dealing with 3,000 guys in Burma, Chiang Kai-shek is dealing with 1 million men in several armies. This is where Stilwell belongs, arguably, and this is what Wedemeyer will do. Wedemeyer will take the divisions we've trained and equipped and prepare the offensive. The Ichigo campaign by the Japanese is to head down to link up in French Indochina because the United States Navy has nearly completely blockaded the Japanese coast. The only way to get supplies to the home islands of Japan to continue the war is by land. And they will succeed in the Ichigo campaign, but China inflicts tremendous losses on them while they're doing it, and they can't maintain it. The Japanese have a constant problem in what we call operational reach. So, these are Chiang Kai-shek's army. The part that we are building is shown here. The 39 divisions plus the 3 that come out of India. 22nd, 38th, and then there's one more that's put together later. So the United States Army and its trainers and its logisticians will provide Chiang Kai-shek 39 excellently trained, manned, and equipped units. We're going to put like 10 combat support hospitals in the region. We want to know when a Chinese kid goes down, he's going to get taken care of just like an American kid that goes down. It didn't always work that way, but at least that we were trying. So these are the formations that will fight for Chiang until 1948, until they're finally disbanded. So my other argument is the United States Army can train, equip, and advise units probably better than any other country on earth. Now you can ask yourself, what about the Iraqi army and the Afghan army? We can answer that in questions. Training somebody else's army is a cultural problem. Okay? So, China offensive then. And you got to have a line and block chart because I teach at the Army School. This is the most important thing. The service of supply. This is Wedemeyer. You can see he's a pretty tall dude. It's all about supply to get those 39 divisions ready. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to do that. But we're also going to set up these schools. A field artillery school, an interpreter school, an infantry school. Teach them how to drive. So we are base plate like we're back in the United States building what is for the next few days something called the Training and Doctrine Command. We build a Training and Doctrine Command in China to do the training piece. This then is the campaign. They will just get started. So this campaign and these 4 boxed armies out of these 6 armies are the ones that were trained and equipped by us. And we will slam into the Japanese and do pretty well. We are headed for Hong Kong, which is down here. Open that port so we can get stuff in from the sea and then go up the coast of China. Because remember, it don't get over till 49. Okay? So this then to me is another indication of how well it was actually working by, we don't start to get stuff in by land until February of 45. So by June of 45, we're on the way to being able to do it. So, who knew the Japanese were going to surrender? Chiang's chief of staff, whose name should be on here, General Ho, he will take the surrender. Now what? The United States Army advisors, a group of, I believe, 42, commanded by General Gallagher, will accompany a Chinese army, 3 divisions, down into Vietnam to take the Japanese surrender in northern Vietnam. The British will take the surrender in southern Vietnam. Ho Chi Minh will declare an independent Vietnam. And less than a month later, the French will come back in and say, no, you don't. And we're stuck in the middle. There's all kinds of stories about, oh, you know, if the United States had done it right in 1945, the war in Vietnam would never happen. Well, this is the team that would have done that. This is the OSS team, Office of Strategic Services, with Giap and with Ho Chi Minh. You just have to ask yourself, is Ho a communist? Or is Ho a nationalist? And then you can answer it either way, flip a coin. We have, I would argue, since figured out, probably leans a little bit towards the nationalist, but if you look at the government in Vietnam today, it's still a communist government. So you're both right if you answer both. We will put the Marines in. MacArthur. This is being taped, so I don't want to say that much bad about MacArthur, but I'll start. MacArthur met and Wedemeyer, Wedemeyer asked for either 8 or 10 U.S. Army divisions to move in. Remember that pink area that the Japanese had occupied? They still are occupying it when the bomb goes off. He wants 8 divisions to get in here, take the surrender of those Japanese, and then turn that territory back over to Chiang Kai-shek's forces. Guess what? I need them in Japan. For what? Make sure a hotel is safe? No, I didn't say that. So he gets 2 Marine divisions. One pretty new one and one used up one. The 1st and the 6th Marine divisions. And they, if you want to read a great little book on it, E.B. Sledge is known for another book with the old breed. This is the China book he wrote about his time in China. And it's a fascinating little read. So, 3rd Marine Amphibious Corps, 2 divisions go into China at Qingdao and Tianjin, and we are helping to put the government back together again as the advisors are now given the mission. Prepare your personnel to move east. So those 39 divisions with American liaison officers and advisors with them, their job now is to get them ready to get on an airplane, our airplanes, and fly back. Now guess who's not using airplanes and ships to sail back to America? We're going to repatriate 1.5 million Japanese back to their home islands from China. We're going to move 600,000 Chinese to eastern China, and there's 60,000 Americans in China that are just going to have to wait till it's their turn to come home, and they're third. Until old Ma and Pa up in Dubuque go, I don't want my son Johnny in Shanghai one more day. And then Congress gets involved and they get home a little faster. So what's the game? I don't know. Nobody thought about it. But believe me, leaving Afghanistan wasn't the last time we hadn't thought through things, okay? It is something that's in our blood, it seems. If you don't win the war, you don't win the peace. Okay, now what? So this is the now what. Simple order, secure the key ports. That's what the United States Navy can do with submarine help. Support military operations essential to reoccupation. Good idea. Which means putting them where communist forces already are, that almost, it just without doubt means the skirmishes will begin. And they do. Provide transit. So we got to move the government from Chongqing back to Nanjing. And move the forces back to take all the pink area that the Japanese had been in. And remember, now the Soviets are here too. They're up in Manchuria. They have attacked the Japanese Guangdong army and destroyed it, decimated it. Maybe 400,000 Japanese remained under Soviet internment for who knows how long. Okay? They went halfway down Korea. They went more than halfway down Korea. Then we drew the line at 38th parallel. They went back north. The Soviets and Stalin, even with the new guy Truman, are acting a bit like allies in some places in the world as they kind of plan their futures, because all of this nobody knew was going to happen this quick. So, with that, I think I've hit my 43 slides, 50 minutes worth. This patch is the patch that Americans wore that were training and advising the Chinese. This medal, which you don't see very often, this medal was awarded to all American soldiers who fought in China, served in China from 41 to 45. And it kind of amazed me when I saw it online and bought one and read what it was. So with that, that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Happy to take your questions. Sir.
Yeah, I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit more on General Marshall's last-ditch attempts to try to salvage things.
That would be an entire new 50 minutes. General Marshall is of the highest, held in the highest esteem in the United States military as a soldier, scholar, diplomat. For him to go to China and attempt to bring the nationalists and the communists back together again in what would be a third united front, he had to know that was mission impossible. But when his president told him, I need you to go to China, and I need you to do something that's very important. We have to have a replacement for Japan as a power in Asia to offset the Soviet Union. So please go over and bring the nationalists and the communists together and try to get a united China. And it's got to be the only thing he ever failed at. And in order for him to do it with what I think he already knew is it is patriotism at its highest order. I follow the orders I'm given by the commander-in-chief, and he did. So that's my best answer to that one. Tom.
First of all, I enjoyed your presentation very much. Also, by the way, I had an uncle who was in the 1st Marine Division who accepted when it accepted the Japanese surrender, I think in Tientsin,
Really?
As it happens. But the question is, you talk a little bit about Stilwell and his role and tensions between him and Chiang Kai-shek. But the question is, what do you think Stilwell should have done differently, if anything?
Gone to North Africa and commanded the 2nd Corps. And then Patton never would have been made into a movie. No, Marshall, basically in Marshall's paper, it said, I knew Stilwell wasn't the right guy to send to China. But when General Hugh Drum, who was one of the most senior 3 or 4 stars in the United States Army at the time, said he turned it down. Apparently his question to Marshall was something like, how many troops will I have to command? And, well, you will be the chief of staff to Chiang Kai-shek and 5 million. No. How many Americans? Well, only the air guys and the log guys. I don't have any combat troops? No, you will have no combat troops. I'm not taking the job. And then so Stilwell is the number 2 choice. And Marshall knows Stilwell. And in the Stilwell papers and in Stilwell's wonderful diary, you get the idea that he really thought the world of Marshall. And so when Marshall would send him, calm down a little, dude. You cannot call him peanut on a rock in front of your staff, peanut on a raft in front of your staff. You can't just keep talking about him the way you're talking about him with your staff. Stilwell would calm down for 2 days and then get right back at it. Because he hated Chiang. Why I think he hated Chiang, and Gary Bjorge in the back is another real expert on this area. When he did not get given full command of the 6 divisions and 2 armies that came down into Burma in April of 1942, when his orders kept being countermanded, or the orders that he were given out had to be transmitted back to Chongqing to get the chop by Chiang, he said, this ain't going to work. I'm going to drive Chiang into letting me command this army, because that political pain in the ass just needs to flutter around drinking tea in Chongqing. And so they just went at each other. Chiang Kai-shek had gone to military high school in Japan. He'd served in the Japanese army. He had fought his way and consolidated all of China. Who's this guy that was a colonel in 1937 to tell him how to fight the war? Nobody could have gone over there. Drum, probably like Wedemeyer later, neither one of them were real China experts, even though Wedemeyer had served in the 15th. They might have been able to see the big picture better. And the first thing they needed to do was Stilwell would have had to stay in Chongqing. He was in 6 different headquarters, all the way from Ceylon to Chongqing to New Delhi to Ramgarh to Kunming. He needed to be in one place. He needed to be next to Chiang Kai-shek all the time, which essentially is what Wedemeyer did. So if there's a model, it's the Wedemeyer model, which is a nice way of saying the army needs perfume princes. It needs strategists. And that's a constant battle. The book on it is Once an Eagle by Anton Meyer, Massengale and Damon. Massengale, Wedemeyer, Damon, Stilwell. Sir?
You referred to a cultural problem just
Oh, sorry.
I want to ask you.
I'm going to talk to the premier cultural anthropologist in the history of
Okay.
KU about culture.
I want
Yes,
to
ma'am,
ask
sir.
you, what is your answer? Who lost China?
Chiang Kai-shek lost China. Chiang Kai-shek was an idiot, a savant. He was a savant at the political part, but he made too many bad military decisions. And I think I have it on one of my slides. All I want from you Americans is your equipment and your training. Stay out of my strategic and operational life. And for that, I continue. There's a wonderful biography by a guy named Jay Taylor of Chiang Kai-shek that was done from his diary. And he speaks very badly of Stilwell in that book. But if you want to read about, if you walk a mile in Chiang Kai-shek's shoes, I don't know anybody that could have done any better. If you walk a mile in Stilwell's shoes, I don't know if anybody that could have done any better. They were just headed for 2 different goals.
How would you answer if I tell you that maybe Edgar Snow and Helen Snow were the beginning of losing China?
Yeah, if you go to Xi'an, China, there's a wonderful museum, and they have displays in for both of them. So it would be an idiocy for me to say that the Chinese communists don't appreciate what they did for them, since they are front and center in the museum in Xi'an. But then again, I believe it was Edgar Snow. You know, he's a communist from Kansas City. Okay, remember that river out there, that separates the other part of Kansas from the communist part of Kansas, I guess. Where I live in the communist part of Canada. Yeah. Edgar Snow, the journalist, is from Kansas City, and he basically wrote the book on the Long March, Red Star over China. Chiang Kai-shek does not look good to most Americans. Most Americans are not into a stratified society like China was. When an American soldier is walking along the streets and he's seeing naked kids, starving kids, they want to feed them. And then they look up at the guy that's running this mess and they blame him. So blaming Chiang Kai-shek was easy. The biggest other side of this, though, are all the Chinese missionaries, all the Christian missionaries. Because Chiang Kai-shek's wife went to school in the United States, converted to Christianity, and converted him to Christianity. So you just started up a whole nother hour and a half discussion of the right answer to that mess. I think Chiang Kai-shek deserves a lot of the blame he gets.
Right, yeah. Yeah, Jeff. Another power center in this struggle that I think deserves some, let's say, attention is there's the Stilwell represents the emphasis on ground power, and we have this debate going on in the military, in the 20s, 30s, 40s, air power versus ground power. You got Claire Chennault over there, and you've got the strategic bombing of Japan taking place from China with all the air bases, and so there's some feeling that fighting down there in northern Burma around Myitkyina is as small potatoes. The real action here is the strategic bombing of Japan from using our bombers and the air power.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And Jay Taylor, that's a key line of reasoning that he uses. The problem is, we built dozens of airfields with runways long enough to accommodate B-29s. It was called Operation Matterhorn. The trouble was, we flew them to India, and then you had to put 4 of them together, 3 of them loaded with fuels and bombs to fly into those air bases. Then 3 of them flew back so 1 could fly and bomb southern Japan. So when we end up in Saipan and the Marianas, we now have air bases that we own ourselves. We can supply ourselves from that line of communication starting in the United States and going through Hawaii and out there, and we can decide what we want to bomb and when we want to bomb it. So the airborne, Chennault is maybe the most brilliant tactical Air Force guy of the war. Strategically, he should have made major and gone to Staff College. One more? Done. Sorry. Great. 100 years of history in 50 minutes. Not bad.